Welcome back to the I Don't Like Murder podcast. This is Jenny with my co-host Rita. Hi, Rita.
Hey, Jenny.
Hey. So today we're going to be talking about Ronnie Long and his wrongful conviction in a rape case. And then we're also going to go over how exonerees are treated once they're exonerated and how wrongful convictions happen. And if you ever serve on a jury, things to look for or evidence that you might question more than it seems like you should. So I'm going to briefly talk about Ronnie's story to set it up, but there's a huge amount of information about his case. So I'm not going to get into too much detail so we can dig into the other stuff. Ronnie was convicted in 1976 when he was 20 years old for raping a woman. He served 44 years for the crime he didn't commit, and he was pardoned by the governor of North Carolina after 44 years in 2020. So some of the things that stood out to me about his case specifically before we get into like general details.
Mm-hmm.
So how he was picked as a suspect is they had the woman who was raped come into the courthouse instead of doing a lineup to identify him. So he was there because he had a trespassing charge. He had court that day for a trespassing charge. So they had her disguise herself and come into the courtroom and said that the suspect that we think may or may not be here today, if somebody looks familiar, point him out, which is, a very odd way about going about identifying a suspect. And they did, after that, they had her do a photo lineup, and she did pick him out of the photo lineup. Her description of the person that raped her was not the same description as he fits.
Mm-hmm.
So that was strange, but he was the only one that she picked out, and she picked him out twice. The thing that stood out to me of why I think he was picked out as the suspect is because she said the person that raped her was a Black man that had a leather coat on, and he had the same style leather coat on. And it was a very popular fashion back then. So I'm pretty sure that that's why he was the only one that had that coat on when he was in the courtroom. And so she saw a Black man with the coat on that looked like the coat of the person that raped her. And so I'm pretty sure that that is what happened. They did, after his court date, they said that he needed to come in for questioning to finish up paperwork on his case or whatever it was. And he came in and they were actually questioning him about this rape. They took the keys to his car and searched it. They didn't have a warrant. They didn't tell him that they were searching his car. They just took his keys and went and searched the car. Of course, they say that's not what happened. It's a he said, she said situation. The cop said this, he said that. So, and in 1976, they didn't, record stuff. They could get away with whatever they wanted back then. So some of the evidence one thing that I heard was that there were matches burnt at the crime scene. There were matchbooks found it was actually his family's car, his dad's car. It wasn't his car, but there were matchbooks found in there that were not a match, but the expert testified that they were similar matches to that. There was a toboggan hat found in the car, which Ronnie said he'd never even seen before. And the guy that raped her had a toboggan hat on. So it was very circumstantial evidence at best and not always evidence that lined up. So it was pretty
And
bad.
he didn't know about the hat. It was just discovered in his truck, and he's like, I don't have that hat. That's not my hat.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. He said, I've never seen that hat before. So yeah, kind of sketchy
Right.
at best. So yeah, he served 44 years, which is a long time. He went to prison at 20. So between 20 and 65 is when he was in prison, which is crazy. That's your
Lifetime.
whole life. Yeah.
Right.
After he was pardoned, and we'll get into this more later, he was granted $750,000 from the state. Exonerees are, we'll get into all the details of that later, but that's all he got for serving 44 his entire life in jail. While he was locked up, both of his parents passed away. His mom actually passed away 30 days before he was released.
Oh man.
Yeah. He had a son that was around 3 when he went to prison. So he missed, 40 years of his son's life, graduating from high school, like all of his major milestones, driving and, everything.
Right.
So yeah, that's like all the things that were taken away from him because he was wrongfully convicted. So now I've got some statistics and some quotes from some places that we can discuss now. Okay. That goes over some of the things of just like what happens. So for exonerees, when someone's released from prison as a parolee, they have programs to help them get housing, jobs, reacclimate themselves to the outside world. When you're exonerated, you don't get those benefits, which is crazy to me because you still serve that time in prison and you didn't even commit the crime and you don't get that. So there's some organizations that do help exonerees find housing, jobs, find their family members. Simple things like your social security card and birth certificate, depending on how long you were there, who your family is, may be lost. You may have to get that paperwork again. They help with that kind of stuff too. Some of them will even help pay rent and utilities for a year until somebody gets established again, which I think is great. It's just crazy to me that a parolee would get these, but somebody who's exonerated wouldn't get those same benefits.
But you should, because exonerated means not guilty of the crime.
Yeah.
Exonerated means whoopsie.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got an indictment on the judicial system, police system, right? So from the very beginning, this guy was it. And so it just makes me think, we rarely see exoneration stories. We've heard of the Innocence Project. Mm-hmm. And I think part of one of your bullet points might be about how hard it is for someone to become, to go through that. Because the way our system is built is, once a jury says you're guilty, it's really hard to reverse that.
It is.
It's really hard. But mm-hmm. My just first take is, well, who's going to help them? Because then in order to say we helped, so especially if you look at that in the environment of, okay, it got to the point of the governor had to pardon them, right?
Yeah.
Or, pardon and say, we're terribly, terribly sorry. Mm-hmm. But it seems totally logical that there isn't a swelling of support for a mistake made by the state.
Yeah.
which is really good we're talking about that, because you hear these stories, because we'll have a case coming up soon that I'm talking about is how it goes the other way. Someone gets out on a technicality, then tries to sue the state. Mm-hmm. And then you hear of other stories where people get a lot of money per year. So it's probably on a state by state and a jurisdiction.
It is.
But still is that you think, okay, because your life is priceless, your freedom is priceless, right?
Yes.
In those 40 years, it doesn't seem quite enough, but in a weird way, it makes sense, because who would be paying for it? Who would be fundraising for it except these smaller groups, right?
Yeah. Well,
there's
actually,
not gonna be yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the money is kind of my next point that I was going to get to. So I'll go ahead and just tell you the stats that I have on that, and then we can keep going.
Sure.
So states do pay exonerees depending on the state. I think 35 states have payments to exonerees. The majority of them cap at 15 years, which is how Ronnie got $750,000. It's his state pays $50,000 a year up to 15 years. So he got paid, it averaged out to $17,000 for each year he was in prison. And one of the best things I ever heard someone say, and I can't remember where, but they asked, would you determine what somebody's life is worth? And they said, well, would you spend that much time in prison for that much money? Of course not. There's no way. No one would give that up. So some states don't pay anything, which is crazy to me. And yeah, I understand, like, whose responsibility is it? And the state, to their own fault, has already, I say to their own fault, they do have fault in it. Maybe not 100%, but one of the statistics I found is 54% of wrongful convictions are because of, I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but let me just find that right now, because it's crazy. A study found that misconduct by government officials is a factor in 54% of wrongful convictions. That is not surprising, but it's also crazy at the same time to think that 54% of people, probably more than that, are sitting in prison because of misconduct by the people who are supposed to be paid to protect you.
Well, yeah, and it's an interesting thing, but remember, they hold all the cards.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that whole thing of saying, of course, now that we have DNA, once the 80s hit, and it's even more, but like we've looked at in no cases, the misconduct not only, it comes from everybody doing the right thing, but then you have the overactive people who, like, where'd that beanie come from? But and this is the other thing as well, is that when we look at the measurement of how much is enough, right? So I can see where states would go, we don't know how, because it's priceless. I mean, you can't put a price on losing your freedom, meaning being in where someone tells you when you sleep, when you go to bed, when you eat, and then you don't go out, you don't have the freedom to touch your family and all that, and you're for life kind of thing. And your whole life is about trying to say, it wasn't me, for reals. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
So they probably just say, okay, we'll set it at 50,000, because there's never going to be enough. If you said 10 million, you'd still say that's not enough. It's 44 years of life because of everything that he missed. Like, he can't do a do-over. So
I mean,
64,
you can't. Right. Yeah, there's no amount of money that you can give to somebody to make up for it, especially 44 years of someone's life. If
and the law is really black, the law is black and white, because that's what you hear a bunch of times. They'll talk about the four corners of the piece of paper, like a contract, and then, or you hear people, they'll say, when you're doing a deposition, remember, it's going to look much different on paper, because because the transcript doesn't show the emotion. And so the
Right.
law doesn't look at that part of it. They're going to go, all right, we got to, so the best way to do it is, because there is no number that's enough. So we have to
Right.
pick a number, and then whatever reasoning they come up with, how many years. And this is my theory, is probably because it takes someone so long to become exonerated. 15 years is
Yeah.
probably the average they're
Yeah.
going to live after, right? So if you're
Yeah.
64 when you get out of jail, you're going to have money until you're 80
Mm-hmm.
at 15, or if you're 70 till 95. And that's an awful way to look at it. That's kind of, I can see it.
Yeah.
I just go back to the fact that the misconduct, for whatever reason, I think there is a hubris with our judicial system, because once you get caught up in it, you are, there's probably people who go, he got off.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'm
because
sure.
right,
I'm
because
sure there
the
are.
way society used to view the entire system, as we call I'll keep saying judicial system, is that, well, a cop wouldn't lie because they're upstanding citizen, and a lawyer wouldn't, and a prosecutor wouldn't, and a judge wouldn't be on the take. And then over the last 30 years going, oh, that happens. We don't know when it's
Yeah.
going to happen. And then especially with the Innocent Project or these cases, and to go, I'm not surprised it's 54%, because who's going to stay? I hit my I hit my numbers. I got some bad guy, whether it was really the bad guy, because there's that weird theory of, the theory, it's an axiom about, you spare one, you don't grab up 5 people, or the one guy in a leather jacket at jail. That's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even sound right. And then of course, so now that she's seen him, she picks him out in the lineup again. That's almost, you almost want to say, what was the trickery here? Because she of course is going to recognize, where did she recognize him from? The incident, or she's recognizing him from the court, because for a jacket and the skin color, scary times.
Yeah.
And that's all it took, right?
It was even that, like, her description of the person who raped her was even that he didn't have facial hair, and Ronnie always had a beard and a mustache, and did when he was in court the day she picked him out. So it's really, she changed over the course of time her original description to fit him more, but she had said it was a light-skinned black man, he's a dark-skinned black man. So she kind of changed that. And then the facial hair, she was like, oh, well, I think he had a mustache, things like that changed throughout the time. So, and also going back to the misconduct, while I do believe that there's intentional misconduct a lot. By all means, I'm a person that is very hesitant to believe government authorities of any type. But I'm also thinking of not just misconduct, but negligence, or people that overlook things, or just human mistakes. Like, there's so many things along the way that can go wrong, that it's really scary to think about. So let's go into a little bit of like juries. And I would really like this to be like, anyone listening, the next time you serve on a jury, keep these things in mind. I will say that the only jury I've ever served on, right before that, I had read a book that was written by one of the first exonerees that DNA evidence was used in. And then a couple months later, was picked to be a juror on a murder case. And so my thought the whole time was, please do not let me lock up an innocent person for this. That was in my head the entire time I was in there. And and knowing what I know now, I completely would have, we did end up convicting him of the murder, and I'm very certain that he did it now. But knowing what I know about the evidence, the types of evidence they used, because it was all eyewitness testimony, jailhouse snitches. There was like slight gun evidence, but it was not necessarily, his fingerprints weren't on the gun, but there were multiple murders and the same gun was used in all of them, but the gun was not solidly connected to him. But knowing what I know now about this, I would never have convicted him ever. The only reason I'm certain that he was guilty is because he had so many cases against him. They had to break it into 3 trials so he could get fair trials. And the judge talked to us afterwards and explained that to us, and to reassure us that we did make the right decision. So I don't even know that settles me now, except the fact that it's the only thing I have to think that I didn't put someone in jail for something they didn't commit. But I'm fairly certain that he did commit the murders. But I would not convict him today with the evidence that they had, because almost all of it, which we're about to talk about, is eyewitness testimony. So according to the Innocence Project, 358 people who have been convicted and sentenced to death since 1989 have been exonerated through DNA. So that's not a huge number. It's estimated that there's 20,000 people in the United States that are in prison right now that are wrongfully convicted, which is crazy. That's a lot of people to be convicted of crimes they didn't commit and that are sitting in prison right now. Of the 71% that were convicted on eyewitness testimony, the people wrongfully convicted served an average of 14 years in prison before exoneration. 41% were cross-racial misidentifications. So first point is, eyewitness testimony is horrible. It is the worst type of evidence you can use. In fact, if I were ever to serve on a jury again, I would not pay attention to any eyewitness unless they personally know the person. If that's a person that is part of their life, their brother, their cousin, like somebody that they're around all the time, their coworker, then, but if it's, oh yeah, this is the random guy that I don't know that I saw, I absolutely would not pay any attention to anything they had to say, because there's a better chance that they're wrong than they're right.
Possible. And then they're right. So say, well, F. Lee Bailey, the former very famous lawyer, he would do these TV shows, interviews, and then he would reenact, someone just right in the middle of him talking, someone just running on the stage screaming, and I look like they're about to attack him. And then he'd pull 5 or 6 people and say, what did you see? And they all saw something different. They all heard something different.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Because that's, and so that's why when there's an incident, police will canvass and say, how many people saw what? And they probably collect enough. But I agree with you. And I think this is good. Number one, that we all carry phones with us, because there's a lot of video now.
Yes.
And that makes a difference. But and then because of true crime, and I heard a prosecutor once say, everybody wants to see evidence. Sometimes it's circumstantial. And it's like, I get it. Maybe there are lots of pieces to a case, but you better show it. If you can't show it, and there are some circumstantial cases, I say, yeah, there's no other person in the world, because we didn't have the smoking gun. We didn't have her DNA all over the place. You killed her. Come on, dude. That's it. But you're right. I think though that a jury needs to, but there's a lot going on in the jury too. And then it depends on the trial and the personal, but that's why we have the jury system, because there's some people who see a young woman who just gave birth, got a 2-year-old, looking, going, I think she's guilty, but I feel bad about sending her away. There's all kinds of, right, that just that human factor. But I'm not surprised that the cases, I'm not surprised by the amount of cases, especially pre-1985, because because the world has changed, and the viewpoint of our judicial system, where, oh, we've seen on TV shows ad nauseum, the cases, like, right, twofold. It's some of it, the cases that never go to trial because the prosecutor can't press charges, there's not enough evidence. And then other shows of the evidence is contaminated. But right. And yet a jury, and if a DA can spin a good story, which they keep saying it's not evidence, but they spin that story to point in all directions. We don't actually have a picture of him hurting her or killing him, but let's put all these pieces together, jury, you can do it. And me, I'm like, I need to see a gun. I need to see something more than everybody, especially the jailhouse stuff, because we all know about, the negotiation.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's also part, because once you're in jail, you want to get out of jail. And if you could say, oh, he was my cellie, and he said, yes, he did it. And then I'll lie on the stand and say, no, nobody coached me to do this. And is there a deal in place? Because now we know, what I found out is, now it's like, it might not be a deal today, but there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. There may be a deal down the road. And that's common knowledge. So I would look at someone in there going, oh, what do you have to gain, right? What does your test? Oh, that's the measure. What your testimony has to gain. If it's an innocent bystander who sees somebody and goes, I couldn't believe it, here's my story. He's nothing to gain, right? So I think there's some eyewitness testimony that could be valuable, but
the thing with the innocent bystander is not that they have something to gain, but it's just the fact that people's memories are wrong, and during heightened stress, your brain kind of blocks out a lot of things, so you don't necessarily have the correct picture or whatever. I can tell you, I was robbed he put a box cutter to my neck, and I had like a 3 to 5 minute conversation with the guy before he jumped over the counter to rob me, and I could not have told you any specifics about what he looked like at all.
Right.
Like, even though I had that conversation with him, I'm not a detail oriented person when it comes to people, like, at all. Like, I can't look at I'm not paying attention to your features. I can't tell you your eye color, the shape of your nose, none of that. I don't see that when I look at someone. So,
but also too, I think though, that we walk around in the normal world, it's so completely out of the blue, something like that, having a conversation like, hey, what's going on and everything. And then 3 minutes later, you've got a razor blade to your neck. Your brain is your brain is probably going through fight or flight.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And going like, I'm not thinking about his tattoos, if he has any. I can't remember the color of his hair because I want to survive. And it would be, that'd be tough. And it's just the same thing, just getting in a car accident. You thought the car was blue and it ends up being green just because you're that adrenaline and because it's so such a shocking thing. But that too. And then the other part of witnesses, there are people who do want to make a gain, who kind of add themselves to the story because they have a vendetta.
Yeah. Yes.
And right. And then you see that. I don't like right.
Yeah. I don't like the way that guy looked, or he gave me a dirty look, or I don't like that he's a different race than me, or any given thing.
Or they say that I knew him 10 years ago and I knew him to be this way, or I knew her to be that way.
Exactly.
And then you see that if you watch a trial and then you watch the defense attorney just rip them into shreds. Because it's like, say exactly what it was, because they're really trying just to say, I'm truthfully saying all of these talking points that the prosecutor wants you to hear because I want to be part of the story. That's the other part though of kind of the sensational, which is what we're doing too, creating content, but the sensational part of these big national cases of how people want to be involved.
Yeah.
And right. And then would they be involved to the point of saying or making stuff up to be on the jury? Sure.
Yeah, people have
Right.
done that.
To either
Yes.
be on the jury to say, because it's weird, and we'll get into it, some other cases that we're shocked and appalled at how many people are making money from a crime, writing books or doing lecture series or, just promoting their career based off a crime. But
Yeah.
jurors write books too, what it was like in that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And they go on book tours and they get agents, and so crime pays for some people, literally. But it's so that's the weird thing is, like, are there people who try their best to get on that jury just in case, especially a big trial?
Well, I can't remember what case it was, but there was a big case recently that someone lied to get on. I can't remember what it was, and it came out after the verdict.
Was that the one about it? Was about the Maxwell case and saying that he was the victim of
no, it was
sexual
before
abuse
that.
Or something,
No, there was that one too. It might have been Kyle Rittenhouse. I can't remember, but it was a bigger one within the last probably 6 months. But people do.
And that's what's so interesting, right? Is that they get a national platform. Everybody wants to talk to juries on a big case. And then to say, here's my story. And I recognized it. I think the thing in the Maxwell case, and it's getting up for, her attorneys are saying, we need this overturned.
Yeah.
And him saying that I talked to the jury about my experience, which, and I'm not an attorney. I don't know if that is, if that rises to the level of a jury member saying, because I think he said something to the effect of, I just, we wanted to make a point of saying that's not okay. Well, that's not what the jury's supposed to do.
No.
The jury's supposed to say is, here's the law, did they violate it? It's a yes or no. And so you can't say, I'm bringing my experience to the other 11 of you to say, this is how they could have felt. Because the evidence is, here are the victims, this is how they felt, not about you. Right.
Well, and it's supposed to be based on the facts that are presented, the evidence is presented, not anyone's feelings. It's not even supposed to be about the victim's feelings, because that's how people get wrongfully convicted, because people want that justice so bad that cases like this, where you wanted somebody to be locked up so bad that we came up with a case that was false, whether it was intentionally false or not intentionally false, you came up with a case that was false. So you could feel like you got justice, but you didn't get justice. Not only does the victim in this case not actually get real justice, now you've created another victim and another whole family of a victim that's gone through this for this many years that does not have their family member out living where they should be now, because you're so hard pressed to make that conviction. I'm a firm believer that I would 100% would rather let a murderer walk free than to lock up an innocent person. As terrible as it would be for that murderer to be back out on the street, I still think that's the better option than locking up an innocent person. And I think the jury selection is interesting in the way that they do it, because both sides get the say, and the prosecution is trying to look for people that are going to have a guilty verdict and may have that slight lean of they're going to be on our side. And then the defense does the same thing. And then they have to hash out who the jurors are, which of course you're only getting what you see and what's on their questionnaire. But still, you probably a lot of times have a slight indication of this person's going to be on our side, that person's not, and you try to knock out the people who are definitely hardcore against you. But it's
but the system is, all of that works if you have money, right?
yeah.
So
Mhm.
public defenders have zillions of cases,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
and they learn how to be either incredible lawyers, probably go on to be, private, some go on to be DAs, but they get a tremendous amount of experience.
Mhm.
But the DA's office holds all the cards in terms of, they get to call it, they've got all the evidence. So the defense is waiting for everything, all that discovery. And all they
Mhm.
have is a client saying, I didn't do it. It wasn't me, kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
But then we have the entire, and this is when we get, bring an attorney on to say, help us understand this part, because it could take years to get to a jury. And then
Mhm.
but in that time, it's motion after motion after motion of what the jury gets to see. So
Yeah.
by the time the jury gets there, the story has been taken apart of, we've heard stories before to go, oh my gosh, I would have convicted him even more had I known he had 3 prior murder convictions.
Right.
Right. But that's
Which
not how it's,
is
yeah, but
why you're not told those things,
right,
because
right.
it should be, in all fairness and objectively looking at it, if you were the defendant, you would want them to look at the facts of this case
Absolutely.
and this case only, and
Absolutely.
not as it should be.
But
But
what if you have,
also,
right, I'm sorry, let me interrupt, but what if you have a not that experienced attorney because you don't have any money,
mhm,
and you've got a prosecutor, because there are some laws that will allow prior acts in based on
yeah,
such and such and such and such. So that's what
yeah,
I mean, is that if you have, if I would imagine a lot of those 20,000 probably didn't have a lawyer that charges $700 to $1,000 an hour.
oh no, I can,
Right, right. In
if I
that,
had to guess, I would say
right.
99% plus had public defenders.
And think of it, 98% of crimes plea out.
Mhm,
So when we start looking at numbers, then to go, there are
yeah,
20,000 people who are believed to be wrongly convicted in jail.
mhm,
And then getting back to the why it takes so long. And
yeah,
obviously for Ronnie, it took 44 years
right, right,
of fighting, because once it seals, and that's, I think we'll have a whole list of questions for our attorney to come on and say, because, and this is just me, what I through osmosis have learned is, once you've been convicted, it's really hard to get overturned. And then, but it
yeah,
takes, but it's just the time process of the appeals process. That's why they say states that have a death penalty, it can take 20 to
mhm,
25 years of
yeah,
appeal after appeal, because we afford, it's weird, a death penalty will afford appeal after appeal after appeal for the death
mhm,
penalty.
yeah,
But like for the process of the exoneree, it doesn't seem to be as swift or as popular in terms of national news. Like, why isn't it part of our, why don't we know about it? We hear, because
yeah,
honestly, without probably the internet, we wouldn't know about a case in Georgia,
yeah, absolutely.
right? And or do
Well,
us
yeah, because
talking
you
about it
wouldn't.
just like it would be a blurb, a blip over a week's time. And
Mhm,
people aren't going like, I wonder how many people. And then, because
yeah,
what you look at it and go, oh my God, that's a terrible, terrible thing. Oh, it's ridiculous, $750,000. And then you move on,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, and the statistics that I saw were there's only 358 people that have been exonerated, but for DNA evidence.
Mhm.
So that's still a drop in the bucket. That's not that many people. So even with the internet, that's still, those stories, that's since 1989. So those stories aren't happening all the time. That's once a year, more or
Right. But
less,
think about
that
how many people,
somebody,
right? Think about how many
yeah,
people are in the criminal justice system now waiting just for trials.
oh yeah,
And then let's tie
yeah,
into it the last 2 years of the courts pretty much being shut down,
hmm,
right? Just so, and then the time it takes just to get somebody through up from languishing in jail to get to a trial, and then
yeah,
if they get guilty, it's just, there's there's so much to it in terms of, unless there's somebody who has a lot of money, who has a
Yeah.
lawyer
Oh,
that can
yes, that
that
solves
can
a lot of
go in and say
problems.
he'll wear an ankle bracelet. It's just, and I think that's kind of a stain on the whole system.
Hmm.
And it breaks it kind of down into the classes of people, is if you don't have enough for that, which the average bear doesn't, or is
Hmm.
not sitting in case, but and then just the insult to injury if you're wrongly accused. And
Yeah,
what makes me sick to my stomach is 20,000 people, they know they didn't do it. And then every time you
exactly.
see that
Yeah.
person come out of jail, and I always think, boy, the grace of that person. So I'm just glad to be
Yeah.
out. I'm just thankful to my family. I don't know.
Yeah.
It takes a lot. I wonder if there's a statistic of people who just couldn't make it, who either took their
I,
own lives, or you know what I
I'm
mean? Is
sure.
that,
I'm sure there is.
yeah.
I'm sure. Well, and it said that they spend an average of 14 years
Mm,
in prison before they can be exonerated.
mhm.
So that's, I mean, way better than 44, but still, that's a long time
Right.
to sit in prison knowing that you didn't do anything
Mhm.
for,
Right.
yeah.
And where do you
Yeah.
go from there?
I
Right.
just put myself in that position, looking at would I convict somebody. I mean, that's, you should be, I mean, I know it's beyond a reasonable doubt, but you should be, I mean, to me, my opinion, not legal advice,
Well, yeah. I mean,
you
a reasonable
should
doubt is
really,
could it happen?
really think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, anything could happen. Like it almost, I would say the most cases you probably could prove anybody beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. But just using the case of Ronnie, someone saying, okay, number one
Yeah.
flag, why would you just take her there? Because
Yeah.
that just seems, the
Yeah.
word
It's
contaminated comes up all over it. And then because the
exactly.
second time, why would you have her go to a lineup? She already pointed him out. And
Well,
now
yeah.
that the brain's going there, I recognized him. So did you recognize the guy who has facial hair? You know,
Mhm.
and it's a weird thing. It's that hideous thing you think of, people saying the police, the detectives already knew it was him. It didn't matter if it was him or not at that point,
Exactly.
right?
And so one more thing about his case, and then I'll move on to my last point. So today might be slightly different on this, but I still think that it holds weight that his jury was all white. It was 1976, and the city that they were in was extremely segregated at the time.
Mhm.
So I feel like that plays into it. So my question is, should it be required for someone or multiple people of your own race to be on a jury? So that one, I think probably yes. Maybe depending on where you live
And who you are, right? So
when
like
who you
Michael
are.
Jackson's lawyers wanted a more white jury up in Santa Barbara County,
Yeah,
right? But
but
you're talking about the regular person.
the regular person, because that's what high profile cases, when they're in court, I feel like that's a whole different situation when it's a celebrity
Mhm.
or whatever, because you're not really going to get a fair trial regardless
I
as a
guess, yeah,
celebrity or a high profile.
yeah.
But as a regular person, like, should that be? And you're supposed to have a jury of your peers. So I
Well,
also feel like
yeah.
if you're a 20-year-old Black man and you have in a segregated, mostly white community,
Mhm.
you have all white, and typically jurors are middle-aged or closer to middle-aged. So you have middle-aged white people judging a 20-year-old Black man. That's not his peers. That's not his peers.
Mhm. Well, I
So
guess
should it be?
I
No, go
guess my
ahead.
thing is, like, when you say required, see, so we have to go back to the jury by both sides in voir dire. that's when they're asking all the questions, right? And they're saying,
Yeah.
based on your answers, we're playing the chess game
Mhm.
of, because you always hear about the juries. It's like, they want more women than men on this one. They want more minorities than white people
Yeah.
for their reasons. And,
Yes.
or they think women will not be sympathetic to this. So let's lean more towards men. But then because both sides are doing it, but then we, as a jury, as we know, we come in order that the computer tells us. So if it happens to be 10 women in a row, because we're a number in the courtroom, and those 10 women answer correctly, remember the prosecutor and the DA only have so many strikes. So sometimes, but that's the way the system is you just don't know what you're going to get. So then on top of it, to say, well, but both sides, they'll do the best they can in the order they get. But then both sides will be going, all right, now we know, we hopefully 6 on plus the alternates, just pretend there's only 12, but 6 on each side we're happy with, that they'll be able to understand and benefit somehow, because it's still a crapshoot until we get the evidence out there, right?
Of course, yeah.
But just to require it, that would cause all kinds of problems, because what if, or because then someone's like, well, for this case, because they already look at the cases, the more high profile cases for people with money, they hire jury consultants, they want to know everything about your life and what kind of clothes she wore versus, the
We're
tie
not talking
he
about
wore.
high.
Right.
We're
I
not
get
talking
it though.
about high profile cases.
But we can't change, right? But we can't say for rich people, for poor people.
No,
right?
but for a regular case. But I'm very torn on that, because I don't think that it should be based on race. But I also understand, like, if you're a person of a minority, you might feel better. You also run the risk of your race judging you more harsh than somebody else would.
And then, well, what if
because
it's,
that's very torn too, because some people are no, I'm going to hold the people of my community to a higher standard because you're making us all look bad.
It's possible. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with class, not necessarily race. Where do we fall in the class scale?
Yeah.
And so say it's a young kid of Mexican origin, and he's in a gang. And then you go, oh, I hope everyone of Mexican origin is on that jury trial, or on the jury. And then you get it, and they're like, yeah, don't be in gangs.
Right.
I'm going to judge you. It has nothing to do with that we're, you've got an all Mexican jury. So that's where it can get difficult. I think it's a class thing. I think the jury system.
Okay, read it. So that actually just made me think, should it all be of the same race? Should it all be of your race? Would they judge you more fairly? Because like what you just said, okay, if you have a sympathetic white woman on that jury of, oh, he had it hard growing up and it's not his fault, and like a virtue signaling person that would say we should give him a break because of that. But then you have the all Mexican jury that's like, oh no, he needs to go to prison, he's in a gang, we don't want that.
Right. Well, I guess because the lottery system that is the jury, so they'll say this case, regular murder case, happens all the time, of course, right?
Yeah.
We've got municipal and our cases. I've been called for a civil case before, snooze fest.
Yeah.
But and then 2 different criminal cases that I didn't get picked for. But they send 1,000 emails across. Most people just throw them out. Those people, and then you have to call the number, right? Or check on the thing.
Yeah.
And of those 1,000 people, then the people who respond find out, oh, your number section is not coming in today. Or please call back after 5, or your jury service, because they weed them out. Then if you still get called in to go, then you get part of another series of things, filling out something. And then
Yeah.
they're only going to pick 90 people from that group of 500. So that, and then nobody cares. You're just a number. I mean, I guess it's all computerized. So it's coming out to go, you're just somebody's number based on your license that came up or your ID. But then we get into the room, and then now we're down to 90 people out of the 1,000 in the courtroom that showed up today.
Right.
And we take them as they come. And now we're going to try and find 12 of those people from this. It like I said, it's kind of like a bingo, the bingo balls that roll in the thing. It's like whatever one pops out. And then you have to say one person at a time. Do you think that you can judge this fairly? Or, you've got the cases where people say, I totally believe in the death penalty. But then when it comes down to, I agree, this person qualifies for the death penalty. But then during the penalty phase can say, I don't really believe in it, or I really can't do it. So they don't get it.
People lie. People lie.
Yeah.
People lie to get on the jury. People lie to get off the jury. But I'm just like, I'm looking at it purely because the jury system is very flawed, very flawed, and obviously isn't working if you have this many people wrongfully convicted. So I'm looking at it as, how can we make this more fair? Would bringing in a component like that be more fair? Would doing all of it in how do we make this more fair? And I don't necessarily think it should be a racial thing, but do you pick people from your neighborhood? Do you go by your zip code? Like, you have to have people from your zip code in there? Would that make it more fair? Because those would be the people who are more affected by crime than anyone else, and who knows the people that live there more than anyone else.
Well, and then
would that be a more fair thing? I mean, yes,
Right.
It would be way more difficult on certain zip codes that have way more crime than others to select those juries. But I feel like this is something that we need to start looking at to reform, because the criminal justice system in a whole is very flawed, but the jury part of it is.
And so it's like there's extreme on both sides. I'm going to give one example as a devil's advocate, even though it was national but very subdued, is the Elizabeth Holmes case. And it was here in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, one of the richest places, right, in the country.
Yeah.
So she went through the whole trial, jury of her peers, it's not exactly a jury of her peers, because there wasn't 12 Elizabeth Holmes exactly like that, but it's just regular people. So you could get a professor, you can get middle class, but they're all in that same zip code area in that whole county.
Yeah.
She got convicted. And so, and it was, but in one of the richest zip codes, it would be people in Beverly Hills. So there is a part where even, that was the one case where one of the jurors said, I don't think I can be on this jury because I just read that she had a baby and it would be really hard. And then they excused her because she already preemptively thought she was guilty.
Yeah.
Before listening, during voir dire. So you're right. So I think my thing is, I think the lottery system of how the jury is picked, it is based on where you live, because it's your county. And it depends on the crime, right? In the municipality.
But my county, specifically, like, my county has people with millions and millions of dollars, and people that are living in a $10,000 crack house.
Right.
And so I think that the zip code thing may be wrong, because, you get, like, there are a handful of zip codes here where almost all of the crime happens. So those zip codes you would have to have professional jurors just to go judge them. And at that point, you're just another government employee. So that may not be that's probably not the answer, but I feel like there needs to be something needs to happen here. If you're getting this many people that are wrongfully convicted, and this many people, like, I didn't understand all this as a juror the first time. I didn't understand this till years later, even though I had read about wrongful convictions, and that was in the back of my head. But the prosecutors spin good stories. Not that the defense attorneys don't, but the person had a public defender. So that was, I mean, they did their job, but they don't have time to spin a whole story like the prosecution does.
Right. And I think, because it's the prosecution's job to prove it. Defense doesn't have to do anything, but I think the defense attorney is really there to minimize what the prosecutor can show.
Yeah.
Right. Is to minimize and say, I know you're going to show crime photos, but you're not going to show 500 of them. But that's that's the defense attorney's expertise in knowing how to do that and argue it.
I think with the photo thing specifically, I think that it needs to be made very clear to jurors that this is of the crime. This does not necessarily connect this person that's the defendant to this crime, because that, I feel like a lot of people get very emotionally involved and they put themselves in the victim's place or the victim's family's place, and they just want that conviction, which is what that I feel like is a problem. And I feel like that's why people get wrongfully convicted, because you have this person on the stand saying, I saw this person do it, whether they did or not. You may or may not have like some physical evidence, which may or may not actually tie the person to the crime. And recently I've heard, I listened to a podcast where somebody got convicted on DNA, but the DNA testing that we have now is so good that it picks up trace DNA, where you can shake someone's hand and your DNA can show up somewhere later. They now can find that at a crime scene and test for that. So now there's people that have been convicted on DNA that are wrongfully convicted, possibly, which is, so we've swung the whole other way, which is crazy.
Plus, I think that's a part of the system, especially with the trace DNA, because, and then getting into the whole thing. I mean, like you said before, we could talk about this for hours, but getting into the whole trial part and the experts, I always say, don't even have experts. They're just going to cancel each other out. You both just stand up and say, this guy was going to say, this is why I did it. This guy is going to say, here's 5 different reasons why it's not. But both sides are going to, especially when it comes to photographs or testimony or someone's mind, right? Is that this is how they could be thinking, or this is why they're not thinking. And I think it's valuable for some. It's like, I want to see the phone records. I want to see the GPS thing. I want to see the likelihood, something in his hand. And then, but I do think that juries are more, and I can only speak just kind of in a very small way, because besides what we see on TV, it's really hard unless you sit and watch trial after trial. And there are thousands of trials going on around the country. Yeah. But I agree. I think that if, I think the other part is it's like finding that sweet spot between the extreme of nobody gets charged. So people are running rampant, committing crimes. Yeah. Because then it's going to switch to the other side of what about all the victims? Yeah. And right. Yeah. How do we recover from that? So but that in between is like, how do we create something that so people aren't falsely convicted? And I think it's going to be in how the cases can be presented, just like you're talking about, is that you should be limited. And that's just what a judge is supposed to do. So it's just really
but they don't do a great. I don't think they do a good job at it always. So I'm sure some do, but I think I do think that having jury education, they go through a little bit of it, but I think to sit down and say, statistically, if you have an eyewitness, which this would be very detrimental to the prosecution, but okay, well, this is a jailhouse snitch. So, they're benefiting, they're getting all this stuff, they're getting all these benefits, they're getting released from prisons, whatever. They're in for whatever crime they committed, and they're here testifying against this person because they told them when they were locked up, or whatever the case is, to say, hey, listen to what they have to say, but you need to weigh this. Like, if it lines up with the evidence, with the hard evidence, consider it more. If it doesn't line up with this evidence, then throw it out, because they're gaining something from it. But I think just putting that in, doing a really good job at saying, and it needs to be an impartial person. Maybe the judge is the one that should be doing it, or have somebody outside do it. It could not come from either of the attorneys, because they're going to still spin it in their direction. And I think one case that probably everybody knows that you can see how the prosecution spun is serial case with Adnan, where the prosecution, like, their story, even if he did it, the story they spun was definitely not the way that it happened. So he got convicted, even though the evidence clearly showed that it was not possible for it to happen with their story.
Right.
So, like, that's just a very simple thing for me to show that the prosecution comes up with the story. And I feel like the better storyteller they are, the more likely you are to be convicted, unless there's hard evidence that you weren't. And if there's hard evidence you weren't, you probably wouldn't be sitting in the courtroom.
Well, and I'll just take it a step in the direction of societal norms, because 25, 30 years ago, no one would, most of the judicial system was held in high regard.
Yeah.
So it would be because we didn't know about some of the corruption that was happening. That took years before that was, people were talking about it, but it wasn't on a national level.
Yeah.
Because, or we kind of say it was the politicians that were corrupt, but all these institutions, right? It's that police officers and attorneys, and I mean, the joke's about lawyers, but they're fighting the good fight. They're keeping the bad guy off the street. And then time goes on to go, wait, what liberty was spared or looked over that we didn't know about unless we lived in those areas? That, that things. So over the last 25, 30 years, I think the societal awareness has gone, hey, that's not cool. And in terms of things to be done, is that I think most juries nowadays, especially in the last 10 years of what we've been able to see and what has been showcased to the other extreme, is to go, something's up and dodge. And go back to the George Floyd case, the tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people across the world that left their homes and walked in protest after seeing that video. And now to go, but I think it's also, there's a grieving and an anger and a denial as a society we have to go through. And then I think people will be more discerning. It's an awful way to come to that, to go, the cops aren't who we thought I want to grow up to be a police officer. And I'm not going into like a political thing about good and bad and evil, but like I said, they hold all the cards. The judicial system holds all the cards against us, the people. Yeah. So if they wanted to, they could make us look the worst ever. And now what we hope for and what we're seeing is to go, you need more of this of the society to go, we need to question that a little bit, because what do you have to gain? What do you have to gain? And then we can go a little bit, the political is, the more crimes that you do, or that you solve, the more you're needed. Yeah. So the more you write that whole go, coasting around neighborhoods going, I know that person. I just saw there's a line in The Wire, that HBO show movie, or that series, and these cops, they were always going to this group of young kids who were dealing drugs, And the cop drives up and they all lean up, turn around, lean up against the cement wall. And the cops were trying to get information from him.
Mhm.
And one of the guys just said, just arrest us, fine us. That's what you're here for. That's your job and that's our job, kind of thing. And there's a sense that their job is to look for, I guess, to validate their position in society.
Mhm. Yeah.
Most people think that they're on the periphery in case things happen. And I think that's what's kind of, I'm not going to wrap this up because it's your segment, but I think it's a bigger thing is that we always need to see stuff. And we've seen some really awful stuff. And it's kind of, I think more people that are in tuned, which can't stay away from it, in terms of what's been happening, we see the very rich get off easy. And we see the poor being treated. So it's not just people who are interested in true crime. We're seeing it on a global level. And that's why I keep saying the difference of classes. There's poor people who maybe caught in the wrong place at the right time, or a petty crime, who are doing a lot of time, or who did time but will be marked with a felony on them for the rest of their lives. They'll never be able to get out of it, right? And so exactly. To go, even though, so that all those types of things to go, that's not fair either. Most people don't even think about that. That is having a mark, whether you did 10 minutes, 10 years, good luck. What are you going to do, right? So our society, I don't think enough people know that it never leaves people. So you can just go, we did as much as we could to rehabilitate the guy who sold an ounce of weed on the corner, and we don't know why he's selling more, because he can't get a job at fast food because they do a background check.
I think a lot of people don't realize that, like, it's really hard to get housing, jobs, like, to just live in normal society. And also I feel like not only that, like, specifically for like the exonerees, that's going to follow them also, even though they actually didn't commit a crime. But still, where were you for the last 40 years of your life when you go to apply for a job?
And that the thing is that the biggest thing is, just like we you see where someone's life can be ruined, or career can be ruined because of somebody accusing them without what we call our due process, right? Exactly. And someone could say, I misinterpreted it, but it was still a crime. And then the world goes like, oh, that's terrible. You're a terrible person. And then 5 years later, you find out, no, that's not really what happened, but the person was in ruins. And even if the person comes back and says, I read an article with a young woman because she was ashamed, and then she accused the gentleman that she was dating of rape. And then 20 years later, he goes to jail. 20 years later, she's got to free her soul and tell her story. And it didn't happen. She was just afraid her parents were going to find out.
Yeah. I think that's a whole nother podcast.
No, that is that kind of thing. But that is a whole nother podcast, but a painful one. My biggest thing is that I think it is changing, but again, unless we're talking about exonerees, who thinks about it? And you're right, but I'm sorry, that whole thing of it going with you, because it's that weird, like I said, it's a societal agreement that we have. It's like, why would someone in the judicial system lie to me? And they kind of come with that gravitas that they're supposed to be for the truth and the blah blah blah. But I'm saying right now, more and more people are going, it's commonplace to question. We should always question anyway, question that authority, but it's commonplace not just to take it hook, line, and sinker. And that the 20,000 people who are going to fight to hopefully be exonerated at some point, they're paying a price for society to kind of wake up to. It's been, I yell about it all the time about marijuana in California, that the amount of people who were jailed in the 80s because they had 1, 2, 3 or strikes.
Yeah,
and sitting there, and
crazy,
and you see it opening. It's going to open up, I'm sure, federally at some point. But to go, a lifetime sentence because he got 3
Yeah.
felonies in a state, and then there's no retraction from that. Because, and this is a whole other podcast, but talking about how once somebody goes to jail or to prison, they're hidden from society. And
Mhm.
so that's the other part of maybe why it takes so long, because no, it's not in the forefront unless you're a family member, right?
Yeah.
Who's saying this is so unfair, but we really don't have resources. But boy, really great topic.
Yeah. So like, unlike you, I grew up in a place where the police system was extremely corrupt. So
Yeah.
I've never not questioned.
Yeah.
So that is like a whole nother like situation of I did not come from, oh, they're here to protect us, and like, no, they're not. They're here to do their drug business and their murder business, and you stay out of their way.
Ooh, that's a good show.
Okay, so I do want to touch on one last topic really quick, because I feel like it goes with the exoneration, and I feel like this is an extremely important one to touch on, is false confessions, because I feel like so many people don't believe that they would ever confess to something they didn't do. And 28% of the cases of the people that were exonerated did involve a false confession. Some of the reasons that people do is, one, they're intimidated, or they perceive that they're being intimidated. They're forced, or they feel like they're being forced. Compromised reasoning. A lot of times interrogations are late at night. They're really long. They don't give them anything to eat or drink, so they're hungry. They're thirsty. Some people are using substances before they are brought in to be interrogated, so substance use can sometimes be involved in that. Sometimes they have mental limitations or age. Age has a lot to do with it, because you don't have a good worldview when you're 18, 19 years old, or even early 20s. One thing I think a lot of people do not realize is that the interrogators can say anything to you. They can lie, they can make up anything, they can say anything to you to get you to say something. And I think that if you put even one or two of these, let's say it's 3:00 in the morning, you haven't had anything to drink, you haven't had any food, and then they're sitting here saying, no, you did it, and like, your wife told us that you did it, and you're sitting here, and there's no way you're getting out of this, and we have evidence that you did it, and your fingerprints were there, and this is there, and that, whatever. Of course. And then you've been there for hours, and some people would think, and I think this is probably where most false confessions come in. I have no statistics to back this up, but my opinion would be that you think I am innocent. So the evidence is going to show that I'm innocent. So I will say I did it because I'm tired, I'm hungry, I just want to go home. I will say that I did it. I want to get out of this torture. And then I'll hire an attorney. The evidence will show I didn't do it, and I'm going to walk free. You know, you're thinking, well, if I don't confess to this, then my punishment's going to be worse. Obviously, they have enough. I'm getting blamed for this, whether I did it or not, obviously. So
I saw a documentary about how that whole interrogation is set up. And they'll even have the AC on full blast, so you're cold. You know, they'll do all different. There's a criminal psychologist who talks over interrogations on YouTube. I've watched them, and he'll point out the techniques.
Yeah.
You know, especially if they come in, and if you've ever been in an enclosed room, so it's hot outside, and you might have a tank top and shorts on, but then they crank up that AC, it's going to get cold. So you're uncomfortable, because they want you to be uncomfortable, unless they want you to be comfortable. And then on and on, you know, so it's and then there's all these techniques that he points out. They're going to go for the friendly person, then they're going to go for the you did it and everything.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot for people. And I think a lot of the ones that are broadcast are ones where people held on for as long as they possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the cases where they have so much proof, they just want them to admit it, because if they admit it, they just go to jail. They don't go through a trial.
Yeah, I think that I think there should be a time limit on interrogations. I don't think they should be allowed to drag it out for hours upon hours. I personally do not think they should be allowed to lie to you.
Oh, and that's a big
I
thing.
think,
But can you also see though someone going, I could see it because I mentioned that they have all the power. Is that as the more and more tired you're getting, and the more you're looking at it going, it's all a lie anyway. There's no way I can get out of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like you're sitting there going, I have no money. I don't have any money to call anybody. And they're bringing down everything down, and all I want to do is go home, and you're just waiting for that one thing, whether it's a soft drink, to take a nap, to go get another drug if you're addicted, or just to go home, or to talk to your mom.
Get me out of here.
They just keep bargaining, right? It's like, is your mom, would your mom, why don't we just talk about it with your mom? And it's a psychological torture pretty much. But yeah, I've seen, and that's a big thing about in interrogations, can they lie? They can make it all up. They can say your mom's in the next room, and she's upset.
That is why you do not say anything except I want my attorney.
Yep. I saw this attorney the other day saying, what if police officer comes to the door and says, hey, I just want to talk to you about something. She's like,
nope.
Yep. It's like, shut up.
Yeah, don't say anything.
Yeah. Right. So don't even ask a question. You go, no, just say no.
No.
As hard as it would be, just say no. And then, no. So, right.
That's how you get yourself in trouble. So don't say anything.
Right.
Yes. So we could go on longer and longer and longer with this, but I think we should probably wrap it up because it's been quite a long time. But first, I want to say I wish Ronnie the best. I hope the rest of his life is amazing.
Right.
He does have a lawsuit trying to get more money, so hopefully he gets that and he can live the rest of his life as great as he wants it to be. And everyone else, share, like, subscribe our video, leave us a comment. Let us know if there's a case you would like us to cover or a topic you would like us to cover. Leave it in the comments or shoot us a message on one of our social media sites. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye. I get to say bye. Jenny doesn't.
Yeah.